The aim of this presentation is to provide an overview of the Maddingley planning study. The Bacchus Marsh Urban Growth Framework identified the need for the Maddingley planning study, and this was due to the current planning provisions being considered outdated, the need to review the Special Use Zone Schedule 1 provisions, which are for the purpose of coal mining, and the need to review the spatial extent of the Special Use Zone Schedule 1 as it currently applies to large areas of land surrounding the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub, including land which is not owned by Maddingley Brown Coal. The map here is an extract of the Bacchus Marsh Urban Growth Framework Plan as it currently appears in the Moorabool Planning Scheme. The blue line here delineates the extent of the planning study area. The dark orange shaded area here represents the extent of the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub as currently shown on the framework plan. The grey shading up here represents the current extent of the Bacchus Marsh urban area. The brown shaded areas represent existing industrial zoned land. The purple shading here represents the extent of the Parwin Station Urban Growth Precinct. And the dark blue shading here represents the extent of the Parwin Employment Precinct. Continuing on with some background to the Maddingley planning study, a background report was completed in March 2019, which provided an overview of the planning history within the study area, reviewed relevant strategies and policies, and identified issues and opportunities. Council undertook extensive community and stakeholder consultation regarding the background report during November and December of 2019. The purpose of the Maddingley planning study is to provide the strategic foundation for changes to the Moorabool planning scheme that will guide future land use and development within the study area and within separation distances to industrial uses. The planning study will also be used as an engagement and advocacy tool for communicating the standards that industries are expected to uphold. For example, best practice operations and social responsibility. This is an aerial map of the study area. The pink shading here represents the extent of the brown coal mining licence at the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub, and it also represents the extent of the EPA landfill licence. Now there's a cluster of existing dwellings up in this area here and also over here. There's an existing hardware store up to the north here, and there's the Bacchus Marsh Grammar School, which sits just outside the study area up here. And to the west of the railway line, we've got existing industrial zoned land with a cluster of buildings that it currently exists around Rowsley Station Road area here. And as I touched on earlier, just outside the study area up here, we have the existing urban area of Bacchus Marsh. I'll now provide a brief overview of the planning study. So the planning study is guided by 6 objectives, which seek to provide long-term net community benefit outcomes. The objectives form the foundation for the strategies and recommendations of the planning study. The objectives and strategies give consideration to the strategic, legislative, and policy context of the study area. The objectives and strategies also reflect the community's desire to protect the amenity of residential land and sensitive uses, together with Council's desire to protect the vision of the Bacchus Marsh Urban Growth Framework for major urban growth. The planning study identifies 6 planning objectives. The first objective is to protect sensitive land uses against encroachment from land uses with adverse amenity potential. The second objective is to protect industrial land uses against unplanned encroachment from sensitive land uses, for example, dwellings or education uses. The third objective is to achieve an appropriate mix of land use and development compatible with surrounding land uses. The fourth objective is to respect the existing statutory approvals in the study area and uses with existing use rights. The fifth objective is to outline the best practice expectations for the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub, coal mining, and other industrial uses within the study area. The sixth objective is to protect environmental values such as significant remnant native vegetation, the Parwin Creek environs, waterways, and other catchments. The Maddingley Planning Study identifies a number of key strategic considerations, including the fact that the study area immediately adjoins the existing urban area of Bacchus Marsh. Bacchus Marsh is currently experiencing significant urban growth, with the population expected to double over the next 20 years. The EPA recommended separation distances applicable to the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub, which extend 2 kilometres from composting operations and 1 kilometre from coal mining operations. These separation distances encroach upon sensitive land uses, including a number of existing dwellings within the Special Use Zone Schedule 1 and the Farming Zone, the Bacchus Marsh Grammar School, a portion of the Bacchus Marsh College, and land currently zoned for residential use, including a large number of existing dwellings. The Waste and Resource Recovery Hub separation distances also encroach upon land within the Parwin Station Precinct and the Parwin Employment Precinct. This map shows the EPA recommended separation distances that apply to existing industrial uses within and adjoining the planning study area. The main ones to note which affect the study area is this red line here, which represents the furthest extent of the recommended separation distances applicable to the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub. Over to the west of the railway line, we've got a number of recommended separation distances that apply to existing industrial uses within the industrial zoned area. And up here we've got the recommended separation distance applicable to Council's existing transfer station in Osborne Street. Continuing on with key strategic considerations, there are very few planning zones that are suitable for land within EPA recommended separation distances, and this is due to the need to restrict new sensitive land uses such as dwellings and schools. Updated industrial and commercial land supply and demand assessments are required to provide strategic justification for the application of Industrial 3 Zone or the Commercial 2 Zone. Council will also need to consider options for application of industrial and commercial zones more broadly within the Bacchus Marsh district. The Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub is identified in state policy as being of state significance. There's a lack of information regarding the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub, such as potential off-site impacts, and the operator's short and long-term plans for the facility. The Special Use Zone Schedule 1, which has the purpose of coal mining, is currently applied to a large number of properties, including 10 dwellings, which are located beyond the boundaries of the mining licence associated with the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub. This study area also lacks urban utility services and has a limited and largely unsealed road network. This map shows the existing planning zones within the study area. This green shaded area here is the Special Use Zone Schedule 1, which has the purpose of coal mining. This area here represents the existing farming zone land. This area to the west of the railway line, the dark brown shading, represents the existing industrial 2 zone, and this area over here is existing industrial 1 zone. The planning study recommends the following changes to the Moorabool planning scheme. Amend the municipal planning strategy and planning policy framework to incorporate the relevant objectives, strategies and planning principles from the planning study as appropriate. Reduce the extent of the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub, including coal mine, in the Bacchus Marsh Urban Growth Framework Plan in the planning policy framework to accord with the boundary in EPA Licence 45288, which is the landfill licence, and Mining Licence 4701, which is for coal mining. Prepare a new Special Use Zone, Schedule 6, and apply it to the reduced Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub area, and rezone land as will be discussed in the following slides. The planning study divides the study area into 6 sub-areas and recommends various planning principles and changes to the planning provisions in the Moorabool planning scheme in relation to each sub-area. This map shows the 6 sub-areas and the recommended zones. Sub-area 1 includes the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub and immediate surrounds. Sub-area 2 includes land which is located immediately to the west of the Waste and Resource Recovery Hub. Sub-area 3 includes land which is currently zoned industrial and located west of the railway line. Sub-area 4 includes land which is bounded by the railway line, South Maddingley Road and Kerrs Road. Sub-area 5 includes land which is bounded by South Maddingley Road, Bacchus Marsh Grammar School, East Maddingley Road and Kerrs Road. And Sub-area 6 is a triangular area of land which is bounded by East Maddingley Road, Parwin Road and Tillies Road. Now, in terms of recommended changes to planning zones, the planning study recommends that a new Schedule 6 to the Special Use Zone would be applied to the extent of the existing mining licence and existing landfill licence applicable to the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub, which is this land here. And the planning study also recommends an area of land which is located to the east of Cummings Road here would be rezoned from Special Use Zone Schedule 1 to either the Rural Activity Zone or the Farming Zone. Now, the planning study recommends that an area of land south of Parwin Creek here would be rezoned from Special Use Zone Schedule 1 to the Farming Zone. The planning study recommends that an area of Crown land along Parwin Creek here would be rezoned from Farming Zone to Public Conservation and Resource Zone. Now, the planning study recommends that the Farming Zone would be retained throughout this area here. And the planning study also recommends that an area of existing Special Use Zone 1 land here would be rezoned to Farming Zone. The planning study recommends that an area of existing Industrial 1 zone land would be retained here to the west of the railway line and south of Rowsley Station Road. The planning study recommends that the existing Industrial 2 zone land between Rowsley Station Road and Kerrs Road would be rezoned from Industrial 2 to Industrial 1 zone. Now up to the north here, the planning study recommends that this brown shaded area here would be rezoned from Special Use Zone Schedule 1 to either Industrial 3 zone or Farming zone. Now there's a small area of land right to the north of the study area here, which is currently occupied by an existing hardware store. The planning study recommends that that land would be rezoned from Special Use Zone Schedule 1 to Commercial 2 zone. And lastly, the triangular portion of land up here in Sub-Area 6, the planning study recommends that that land would be rezoned from Special Use Zone Schedule 1 to Industrial 3 zone and or Commercial 2 zone, or alternatively to Farming zone. Now the discussion on the following slides will attempt to go into some further detail regarding these recommendations. I'll now discuss the recommendations relating to each of the 6 sub-areas. So in relation to Sub-Area 1, the recommended planning provisions include reducing the extent of the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub as shown in the Bacchus Marsh Urban Growth Framework, in the Planning Policy Framework, in the Mirrable Planning Scheme, to accord with the existing EPA landfill licence and mining licence boundaries, which is this pink hatched area here. The planning study recommends preparing a new Special Use Zone Schedule 6 and applying it to the reduced Waste and Resource Recovery Hub area, again, which is this pink hatched area here. The planning study recommends that the Special Use Zone Schedule 6 purpose would provide for use and development for waste and resource recovery and coal mining, but excluding putrescible refuse disposal, and encourage the use of best practice technologies and processes and best practice rehabilitation. I might just add that the current extent of the Maddingley Waste and Resource Recovery Hub as depicted in the Bacchus Marsh Urban Growth Framework Plan is all of this land here. So the recommendation is to reduce the extent of the Waste and Resource Recovery Hub in the Framework Plan to the current licensed area, which is this pink hatched area. Continuing on with recommended planning provisions relating to Sub-Area 1, the planning study recommends rezoning land on the east side of Cummings Road, as depicted by pink hatching, from Special Use Zone Schedule 1 to Rural Activity Zone. That's this area of pink hatched land here. The planning study also recommends applying a schedule to the Rural Activity Zone with the following purposes: to provide for leisure and recreation uses, to provide for non-agricultural use and development if it is compatible with surrounding land uses, and to provide for non-agricultural uses that rely upon close proximity to the Bacchus Marsh urban area and transport networks. Continuing on with recommended planning provisions in relation to Sub-Area 1, the planning study recommends rezoning the pink hatched area of land here to the south of Parwin Creek from Special Use Zone 1 to Farming Zone. The planning study recommends applying the Design and Development Overlay Schedule 2, which is visual amenity and building design, to all proposed rural activity zone and farming zone land, consistent with its application to other rural zoned land in Mirrable. And lastly, the planning study recommends rezoning the pink hatched land here from farming zone to the proposed special use zone Schedule 6 and removing the design and development overlay Schedule 2 from this land. Now, in relation to Sub-Area 2, the planning study recommends the following changes to planning provisions. Rezone the pink hatched land shown here from Special Use Zone Schedule 1 to Farming Zone. Apply the Design and Development Overlay Schedule 2, which again relates to visual amenity and building design, to proposed farming zone land consistent with its application to other rural zone land in Moorabool. The planning study also recommends rezoning this area of Crown land along the Parwan Creek from farming zone to public conservation and resource zone. In relation to Sub-Area 3, the planning study recommends the following changes to the planning provisions. Rezone the pink hatched land north of Rowsley Station Road from Industrial 2 zone to Industrial 1 zone. That's this area of land here. The planning study recommends introducing local policies to encourage rehabilitation of land previously used for sand cleaning, to encourage uses that require large tracts of land to locate to the south of Rowsley Station Road, to encourage a range of lot sizes, to maintain significant setback distances from Bacchus Marsh Bellyang Road to new buildings and works. The planning study also recommends considering rezoning the Industrial 2 zone land immediately north of Kerrs Road to Industrial 3 zone as part of the planning study implementation. That recommendation relates to land to the north of Kerrs Road up here, which is just outside the study area. In relation to Sub-Area 4, the planning study recommends the following changes to the planning provisions. Rezone the pink hatched land from Special Use Zone Schedule 1 to Industrial 3 zone, which is for service industry uses, subject to a review of industrial land supply and demand. And that's this land here. Alternatively, if Industrial 3 zone cannot be strategically justified, rezone the land to farming zone. Apply a new development plan overlay schedule to all land in the sub-area. Continuing on with Sub-Area 4, the planning study also recommends the following changes to the planning provisions. Rezone the pink hatched land containing the existing hardware store from Special Use Zone Schedule 1 to Commercial 2 zone. That's this area of land up here. The planning study also recommends supporting the future rezoning of the green hatched land for education use and development. That's this green hatched land here. This recommendation is subject to the proponent providing evidence that a reduced separation distance is appropriate and soil conditions being appropriate for the use, noting the land has previously been used for mining. In relation to Sub-Area 5, the planning study recommends the following changes to the planning provisions. Rezone the pink hatched land from Special Use Zone Schedule 1 to Industrial 3 zone, that is for service industry type uses, subject to a review of industrial land supply and demand. This recommendation relates to this pink hatched land here. Alternatively, if Industrial 3 zone cannot be strategically justified, rezone the land to farming zone. Apply a new development plan overlay schedule to all land in the sub-area. In relation to Sub-Area 6, the planning study recommends the following changes to the planning provisions. rezone the pink hatched land from Special Use Zone Schedule 1 to Industrial 3 Zone, that is, for service industry type uses, and or Commercial 2 Zone, subject to a review of industrial and commercial land supply and demand. This recommendation relates to this pink hatched area here. Alternatively, if Industrial 3 Zone and or Commercial 2 Zone cannot be strategically justified, rezone the land to Farming Zone. Apply a new Development Plan Overlay Schedule to all land in the sub-area. In addition to the recommended changes to the planning provisions, the Maddingley Planning Study also recommends various planning principles in relation to the 6 sub-areas, separation distances and buffers, transport and infrastructure, coal mining, and natural environment. The planning study also recommends that Council engage with Maddingley Brown Coal to gain an understanding of their long-term plans for their landholding, to encourage open-air composting to be converted to in-vessel, to encourage best practice operations to minimise adverse impacts to the surrounding community and environment, and to explore potential application of the buffer area overlay. Now I'd just like to discuss the implementation of the Maddingley Planning Study. One or more planning scheme amendments will be required to implement the planning study recommendations. A significant body of further strategic and technical assessment work may be needed to justify and inform a planning scheme amendment, such as industrial and commercial land supply and demand assessments, strategic assessment of options for the application of industrial and commercial zones in Bacchus Marsh, Maddingley strategic directions, which will provide final recommendations for the study area, a more site-specific biodiversity assessment, an integrated transport management plan, an infrastructure servicing plan, a drainage scheme or strategy, a cultural heritage assessment, and an assessment of potential impacts of the waste and resource recovery hub, for example landfill gas, on urban land use and development. Thank you for your time in listening to this presentation regarding the Maddingley Planning Study. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact Council's Strategic Planning Team.